But next we'll talk a little bit about the influence of arousal. Again, arousal, I mean like overall awareness. We just talked about sexual attraction and everything, so it's hard not to think about arousal in the other way. But yeah, so overall, like just state of awareness is what I'm talking about. So the influence of that on motivation, performance, and also our preferences for certain types of stimuli. So, you know, a lot of you maybe have experienced what I'm about to describe. Like, do any of you play a sport? Okay. When you're playing your sport, do you want to feel like immense pressure and stress when you're going into it? Probably not, right? Someone said yes. I can't tell if you're joking, but I'll ask you to elaborate. Anybody? No? Okay. All right, so what?
There's something interesting that I read was people with ADHD, or there's a lot of F1 car drivers that have ADHD because people with ADHD tend to perform better under pressure.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so I could see where there's like certain conditions where, yeah, that pressure
Or, like,
might be helpful.
Stimulating, like, they like risky things like going fast, speeding, and those type of tendencies. So that's why they put you on stimulants.
Right.
If you have
I heard that
stuff like
about mountain climbing too, because you have to focus or you're gonna die.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Forces
So
them
it
to
forces
quiet
them
the
to.
brain.
Interesting. I have a couple slides talking about ADHD, and maybe we'll circle back to that. Yeah.
Kind of similar note. I have ADHD, and for some reason, I don't have any, like, test anxiety's never been a problem for me. I have all sorts of problems doing my own work at home.
Right.
Put me in the testing situation with a piece of paper in front of me, and I have to do it in a certain amount of time, and a lot of my concentration problems just disappear.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. We'll talk about ADHD at the end of this PowerPoint. So kind of put a pen in those thoughts and see if we can circle back to them and tie them back to this maybe too as well. So yeah, okay. So I'd say in general though, most of us prefer not to have an immense amount of pressure, you know, going into some sort of, especially like high stakes situation or something like that. And so there's this concept called the Yerkes-Dodson law that tries to capture this idea that particularly if you're doing difficult tasks, you want, you know, there's sort of an optimal state of arousal for every task that you could do is kind of the easy way to say that. So, you know, if you go into a situation, you have a really low arousal level, that would essentially correlate to like boredom or apathy. And if you have a really high state of arousal, then that could lead to anxiety and stress, which often decreases performance. And so anytime you're doing any task, you want to be at some kind of optimal level that's in between those two. So the interesting thing, though, in Yerkes-Dodson law is that it's been shown that easy tasks tend to benefit from a higher level of arousal. So for easy tasks, the optimal level is higher than it is for difficult tasks. So, you know, just some examples of studies that have kind of shown this to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. One of them, the easy task that they had participants do was they literally sat in front of a computer and like whenever there would be shapes flashing, and whenever there was like a square, they were supposed to push a certain button. So like easiest thing in the world, just identify what a square is, right? What they did though is they had some participants, they basically varied like levels of caffeine that they administered to the participants while they were doing it. So some of them had none, some of them had like 100 milligrams, some of them had 200 milligrams, like escalating amounts. And what they found is that the higher levels of caffeine actually benefited their performance because they had faster reaction times, what they were measuring. So the ones who had high caffeine, they could hit the button to say that's a square faster than the ones who had low caffeine or no caffeine. A difficult task, so this one is quite different, but basically what they did is they had participants shooting free throws, like, you know, basketball free throws. In the low arousal task, they were basically just kind of like playing around, like, you know, shoot as many free throws as you want. There's nobody around watching them. There's no stakes to it or whatever. Then they had a high stakes task where they had them shooting free throws, but the like stands were full of audience. There were cameras and lights in their face. They also told them that for every free throw they made, they got like $10 or something. So there's actual stakes to it. What they found is that people performed better in the low stakes condition compared to the high stakes. So whenever the stakes were higher, their performance tended to go down. So again, there's kind of this contradiction a little bit, like easy tasks seem to benefit from higher arousal, whereas difficult tasks tend to benefit from lower arousal. So that's called the Yerkes-Dodson law. I'd say main thing to take away from that is just this idea that the optimal level of arousal is going to depend on a lot of things. Part of it is just the difficulty of the task. I'll also say, so arousal impacts both performance, like I just described. It also impacts our preferences for, various kinds of stimuli. So things like music, art, poetry. The level of arousal that's created by those stimuli changes our preference for them. And again, by arousal, I mean, overall alertness. One of the interesting things about this is that it's been shown that arousal correlates to complexity. So typically, the more complex a music piece is or an art piece is, the higher level of arousal that will trigger, and the lower the complexity, the lower the level of arousal. Have an example of this with music. Let me see. I don't know what my sound situation is right now. Let me think for a second. I should have checked it before and I forgot. Let's just Sorry about that. Give me 1 second. I'm going to try to switch. Actually, maybe I'm worried if I unplug this, it's going to stop recording, but I'm going to try it. Okay, let me turn my volume all the way up. So this is going to be coming from my laptop. So I'm going to play 2 song clips. Basically, I'll play the first verse of each one. And I want you to just, sit and listen. And then at the end, after I've played both, I'm going to ask you which one you like better. So here is the first one.
We come, we chained our hearts in vain. We jumped, never asking why. We kissed our fell under your spell of love. No one could deny. Don't you ever say I just walked away. I will always want you. I can't live a life running for my life. I will always want you. I came like a wrecking ball. I never hit so hard in love. All I wanted was to break your walls. All you ever did was wreck me. Yeah, you wrecked me.
All right, stop that one. Now this is number 2. All right, that was number 2. Let me plug back in. All right, how many of you preferred song number 1? All right, song number 2? Yes. All right, so that's kind of what I was expecting, is that most of you would prefer song number 1. What did you like about song number? First of all, had any of you ever heard those specific songs before? Yeah?
Yes.
So I know the first one is a cover of Wrecking Ball by Miley Cyrus, but had you heard that specific rendition before?
So I would say my motivation for saying the first one I liked more than the second one
Mhm.
has to do with the fact that I listen to a lot of symphonic metal,
Right.
and I can't stand the screaming.
Okay.
It just drives me nuts.
Good to know. So if the screaming had been left out, maybe you would have preferred the second one.
Yes.
Okay. Good to know. All right. What else? Anyone else? Why'd you prefer number 1? Oh, I think it's Amy, right? Yeah, you were first. All right, so number 1 matches your current mood a little bit better. Interesting. All right, Hannah?
It was easier to listen to, smooth, you could relax while you were listening to it.
Yeah, yeah,
The other
definitely.
one was kind of like, she said, it's crazy.
Right, yeah, okay. So I would agree with everything you're saying. I think, so the reason I picked these 2 songs is, first of all, they're actually by the same artist, which might be surprising. So the band is called Thrice, and like the second song is one of their original songs, and then the singer likes to do like acoustic covers of pop songs or whatever. So yeah, it's the same singer for both of them. The first one, though, obviously pretty simple. It's just one guy with a guitar singing a pop song, which historically is going to have, a small number of chords. It has like the very typical song structure, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, or whatever. There's probably no key changes in there. It's a very like simple song. The second one, especially if I'd let you listen to the entire thing, is much more complex. It's an entire band. They have, I think, like 2 guitarists, a bassist, a drummer, a singer. There's a lot of like discordant, sort of harmonies or whatever. A lot more chords. They do change keys at some point in the song, although you probably didn't hear that. So there's a lot of complexity to the second one, whereas the first one is a lot more simple. And of course, there are lots of other things motivating your preferences besides that, right? Like familiarity, just your overall preferences of like, vocal style or whatever. But that complexity, I think, is a bigger piece than maybe people realize. So we tend to prefer things that are kind of in the sweet spot of complexity, kind of like the optimal level of arousal for performance on different tasks or whatever. One of the interesting things about this, though, is that complexity, we can measure it objectively with all those things I just talked about, like chord structures, etc. But it's also a very subjective thing that changes with your exposure and your experience. Part of the thing that makes the first song simple, too, is that probably all of you have heard the original Wrecking Ball song, so you at least already know like the lyrics. You kind of know what to expect is coming next. So that familiarity makes it a little bit less complex because your brain already has like a piece of it figured out, essentially. And exposure, the more we listen to a particular song, the less complex it's going to seem over time. So what can happen oftentimes, how many of you have ever had the experience of like you hear a song, especially like some sort of pop song, you really like it at first and you play it over and over again, and then at some point you get like sick of it, you don't want to listen to it anymore. Yeah, so, and what's happening there is that the complexity of that song to your brain is basically getting smaller and smaller every time you listen to it. Your brain kind of figures out like, okay, this is the next chord progression, and this is the hook, and this is whatever. Your brain sort of puts the puzzle together, and it becomes too simple to where it's basically boring at that point to listen to it. But with these more complex songs, I bet you, even if you didn't like it, if you went and listened to that song maybe 20 times, I bet you over time you would start to like it more because the complexity starts, like right now the complexity is too high, where it's putting you kind of in that anxiety state. But if you keep listening to it, it's going to get a little bit simpler. Eventually, it's going to get to like that optimal level where you actually do enjoy it. You might have had that experience too. I've had that with certain bands where like I really love the band. I know I like most of their music. They put out a new album and I listen to it and it like doesn't, I kind of don't like it at first. But if I just listen to it a few more times, eventually I figure out like, okay, it was just a little too complex. I needed to give it a few more listens to sort of figure out all those pieces I just talked about. So yeah, so then you can apply that same concept, like I said, to art, visual art, to poetry. It's been shown to correlate with those as well. Any questions about like arousal, complexity? Okay,